Welcome to the Eagle Heritage Project. My name is Bill Thompson, Executive Director of Engagement Initiatives and Heritage Project on the Daytona Beach, Florida campus of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Today, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Heritage Project. This is where we meet our alumni from across the globe, our alumni who are doing fantastic things, our alumni who help share the heritage of our 100 years as we celebrate our centennial this year at Embry-Riddle. Today, I have a very special guest, Jeffrey Reis. Jeffrey, and I can call you Jeff, correct?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
Jeff comes from a background where I didn't know where you grew up, so we're going to go into that, but really came from the Navy, then came to Embry-Riddle in 1989. There's been a lot of changes. We are here in 2025. There's a lot of changes since then, but Jeff has been heavily involved in my flight advisor. And I look at what you've done. I look at your career. I look at management information systems where you started on some of this, where you grew your own when you're at Embry-Riddle. And so I think you're a great person to share your knowledge, to share your experience, and to share your passion of Embry-Riddle. And Jeff, thank you for joining us here today.
Happy to get here.
Introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from, too.
Well, I'm actually from all over the world, more or less. I've moved many, many places. My parents were in the Peace Corps when I was younger. So moving around the world for that, and grew up in Dallas, more or less, from about sixth grade to high school, and then I left and joined the Navy and haven't looked back since, and it's been pretty much constant move and living in Miami right now.
Very good. And so here we are. Let's go back to 1983, I think, somewhere around there. No, 1989, because you graduated in 1993.
I did, yes, sir. That's correct.
So you graduated from the College of Business, which is now the O'Malley College of Business on the Daytona Beach, Florida campus. Then you graduated in Aviation Business Administration.
That is correct.
How did you even find out about Embry-Riddle in 1989?
So, that's a really funny thing, and I have to think back to those times before we had social media or the internet really or anything else. And because I was in the military, as you probably know, Embry-Riddle, very actively involved with the military. And when I was looking at schools that I would be going to, there were some options there for aviation, and specifically for the program that I was in, where the Navy wanted to send me to school and have me come back and go to flight school. Embry-Riddle was obviously at the top of the list for that. And so there were books and catalogs and some things I think that we had on board of our ship that talked about the different programs and things. And I wrote away for some information that was mailed to me back in those days and found me out in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, or Mediterranean Sea, I should say. That's looked through the books and got excited by the pictures and what was going on, and thought that was the place for me.
Very good. And in that time period, you mentioned being a pilot. And you were hoping to be a naval aviator at that time, correct?
It's true. I started learning to fly when I was 17, when I was in high school, but could not afford to continue. The Navy had a program at that time that was short-lived of doing a couple of years of enlisted service. And then depending on how that went, then sending you to college and bringing you back to go to flight school. So I went into that program and did my 2 years, and with the expectation of coming here. And of course, I came to Embry-Riddle. I couldn't afford to fly here at the time. I was paying my own way through everything. I was lucky that the Navy was giving me enough money for school, but it certainly didn't cover the fees. So I learned to fly at, I think it was called Eagle Flight Center at the time, maybe, here on the field, and got my license over there while I was attending school here.
And we didn't talk about it before, but you still fly.
I do, yes, sir.
Okay. So tell me what you fly right now and you're very involved in aviation. So how many hours, can I ask that question? And what's the last airplane you flew?
Interestingly, not a lot, about 380 hours. I stopped flying for quite a while. I actually had a interesting experience, and believe it or not, with an Embry-Riddle former instructor here, Bob Routh, who was an aviation law instructor. And if you know, former TWA pilot who was famously hijacked to Havana, and the interesting picture of him there. And Bob and I became really good friends. He was my dive instructor, and I learned to dive with him. And we were actually flying one of his Cherokees back one night from, I believe, Memphis, Tennessee, middle of the night, and started having serious engine problems in rain at night at about 2,500 feet. And we had to make an emergency landing. And it's terrified me. And it scared Bob too. And we both were not happy with single engine piston power airplanes after that. And I know they're safe, but you only have so many lives. And that shook me up a little bit. I was doing so much flying before that, flying back and forth to the Bahamas all the time to go diving, never really thinking or concerning myself for what the dangers might be. But that kind of brought it front and center. So it kind of slowed me down for a little bit. And I didn't pick up flying again then for quite a few years. And by that time, just, ironically enough, starting companies so that I could buy my own airplane to fly around, and always so busy that I never got the time to actually do that. And then with the family, everything changes from there. And it's something where every once in a while, if I can get some time in a friend's Cirrus SR-22,
Yep.
On occasion I do that, maybe jump into the right seat of a King Air, Vision Jet, whatever I can get behind and have some fun with, I do that wherever I can.
And actually, one of the reasons I'm glad to know this information, because we have so many students who will start here and they'll be in the flight program and then they'll go, maybe flight isn't 100% for different reasons. You have your reason and they'll have their reason. Sometimes it's finances. Sometimes maybe I don't have that same passion on the flight deck or in the cockpit or whatever. And what you're showing is I still have the passion, maybe not flying every day for a commercial airline or for a private organization, but look how you've made your career. It changed where your career path is, and you've been incredibly successful with the passion for aviation, but not having to fly every single day, but knowing you love that component. Is that a fair statement?
It's true. I mean, flying is just, one part of the ecosystem that makes up aviation. And there's so many interesting career paths. There's so many interesting things that are happening. I mean, we live on the cutting edge of technology and physics and pushing the boundaries. Look, we're coming back to supersonic travel again. There are just so many interesting things that are happening. And I think a lot of people think initially that flying is interesting, and it can be. Military flying, obviously very interesting. Flying privately, there's, whether that's corporate, whether that's charter, a lot of people like the unknown of where am I going the next day. Then there's the airline side of it. And for some people, they make a career of it and they really enjoy that. And for others, they find it to be monotonous and they say, you know what, maybe there's something else. And what's wonderful is having that background and experience allows you to move into literally any facet of our industry. And I've seen, and obviously, so many of the graduates and the people that I know here and fraternity brothers that have done that, and having that very discussion last night about going around the table and, all right, who here is doing what they thought they were going to be doing when they got here? And that was a very interesting conversation.
Well, let's elaborate on that a little bit as we talk about, because Lambda Chi Alpha is the fraternity you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
And you have some brothers actually come back to campus. That's one of the reasons you're here today. And we had this opportunity to connect. But as I look at the 6 individuals, including you, I'm seeing an incredibly successful career path for everybody. And so can you tell me, is it the brotherhood? Is it the passion for aviation? Is it the industry, or is it everything combined that brings it all together and made everybody so successful?
I think it's everything. I think if you come to Embry-Riddle, you come with a very specific focus. And maybe you change your major, but if you're at a general college where you say, oh, I'm in communications and I'm going to go to psychology or economics, at Embry-Riddle, you come here because you have a passion for aviation and you want to go to the best school, hands down. Once you get here, I think sometimes maybe your eyes are opened up a little bit. What I marvel at looking now at my fraternity brothers is we all share a passion for aviation. We're so different in some ways in the past that we've taken and the choices we've made, but underneath of that is a passion for aviation and for something specific that is what drives people here in the first place. And I think we're just built differently. If you come here, there's something inside of you that makes you love it. I mean, to this day, I live close to the approach and departure path for Miami International. I still, if I'm in my swimming pool, every time I hear an airplane go over, I still look up. I see what it is. My kids now know, they're like, oh, I can tell that engine. That's an Airbus, and you never lose that childlike wonder. Even if you don't fly, it's still just being a part of this. And it's a camaraderie and a fraternity of souls, and not just Lambda Chi Alpha, but every Embry-Riddle graduate that I run into now that are, our age, older, and we talk and you still see the twinkle in their eye. You still see the amazement and wonder. And that's what I absolutely love about this. And I love that Embry-Riddle continuously sparks that. And then they keep that flame going.
And you had mentioned that when we met earlier today, we were talking, you talked about the name Embry-Riddle and how across the board, as soon as you shake hands and somebody realizes you're a fellow Eagle, all of a sudden it creates a different bond right away.
It does. It changes things because it's a shared experience. When I was in the Navy, there were two types of sailors. There were what we call the dry sailors and the wet foot sailors. And we were the fleet guys. So if you'd never been out to sea, then you were treated differently. And so I remember the first time that I reported to NAS Key West for my reserve duty after active duty. And the guys were kind of like, well, who are you? And kind of giving me a hard time. And then I actually happened to know one of the people who was there because he had been on the ship with me. And he said, oh, this is a fleet sailor right here. And that changed everything because it's like when you've done something, it's a shared experience and a bond that you cannot necessarily explain. And I think those of us, when we meet each other, we had a purpose in our lives. And even if we leave aviation, and some of us do, we still share a love of that and a bond of the experience that we had here. Whether you were part of a fraternity, another club, or part of nothing, just the experience of being here was something that I think that binds us all together. And I was so impressed over the years to see that doesn't diminish. It stays within us.
It does stay within us, no question about it. I'm going to step back again. So here you are. You're coming out of the Navy, and now you're coming onto campus. What was your first experience when you stepped on campus?
I was honestly overwhelmed a little bit. It was, and back in those days, Embry-Riddle was a very simple place, but I marveled at the size of it. That I think was a big part of it. It allowed me to have, and I can't speak to the experience now, but back then, with 5,000 students, it was a very intimate experience. Everything that happened could happen at a smaller scale and therefore be shared university-wide. As we mentioned, there weren't 200 clubs back then. There were far fewer clubs. And Embry-Riddle was a very, I don't want to say Wild West, but it was such an interesting place. And I dare say that it was not formalized. It was formalized enough to provide a consistent education, but open enough to allow experimentation and the things that I was able to do. Maybe you could still do here today. I don't know. But those things that I was able to do literally propelled me into my career. And I can say with complete honesty, if it were not for this school and the experiences that I had here, I would not be where I am today, pure and simple.
Well, let's talk about that, because part of that is how driven you were in your degree program. And there was a computer program. There was something that you wanted to create, but the school didn't have it at the time. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I found out through a friend of mine that they had the ASSL, and they were kind of doing Skunk Works projects.
So ASSL, could you tell everybody what that's?
Which Aviation Science Simulation Laboratory, I believe. I'm embarrassed that I don't remember that. It was one of those things, like people never even said what it was. It was just the ASSL. Yeah. It was the building across the street because it was the only building across the street, that you had to walk over there. And that simulation laboratory was, I believe at the time, kind of, Skunk Works is the way I want to call it. And Jim Blanchard was the manager over there. And that guy was just absolutely amazing at helping the students become involved in projects, but in an integral way where you really felt like you were making a difference. And I wanted in there badly. And I was a freshman with no real experience. I spent my freshman year here kind of, getting my footing and coming from the military. It was a big adjustment for me. And I had the opportunity. My father was in real estate development down in South Florida, and he had a civil engineering firm. And I went one day over Christmas break with him, and I saw they were working in AutoCAD and doing all these interesting things. And I'm like, man, I love computers. Like, this is amazing. And I talked to the owner, and he said, well, what are you doing this summer? And I said, I don't know. I need to figure something out. He said, then you're going to come and work here. And I went there and I spent the summer learning everything there was to learn that I could about civil engineering, but about AutoCAD and the application of 3D vector graphics in how you apply that to the world. And I came back here and I went to talk to Jim Blanchard, and he said, well, what can you do here? And I said, well, I'm really good with AutoCAD. And he said, you know what's funny? We're working on a project, and honestly, we need somebody who knows AutoCAD. And we have this cool new thing called the Sun Spark Workstation, and we were able to get AutoCAD for it. And we're doing this project, and we need somebody to build a aircraft carrier, 3D full aircraft carrier. And he's like, well, you were in the Navy and you know AutoCAD. I think you might be good for that. And it was as simple as that. And he gave me a shot, which I was so happy about. And that just changed my world. It was that experience being there, the camaraderie, the projects, that's what set me on my path.
And your path is all about technology, bringing things together and having people see what's there. As we take a look at where you are today, can you talk about that path some more, where then it leads up to literally you've got an incredible company that really tells everybody, here's what you need to know if you want to fly an aircraft, own an aircraft, do something with an aircraft. Talk about that whole path, because it's a track.
Well, I will just say this, and it's super important that I point this out. That experience at the ASSL and the things that we built back then led to ground-based aircraft navigation, led to synthetic vision. We worked on the first digital flight data recorder. Basically, it was a simulation and visualization system that we were able to take the data from this United Airlines 232 Sioux City, Iowa crash and recreate that. And the pride of the things that we as students were doing here that were making a difference in aviation. I mean, that is what really made a big difference. We could see it out there. And then we had to figure things out. Somebody gave us an old 707 shell. They said, we want to turn this into a simulator. And we had a whole team of us. All right, well, it's a bunch of analog buttons and switches and knobs. How are we going to digitize that? Oh, this thing called the VME bus. All right, we could get one of those. All right, how do we calibrate this? Like, everything was us just figuring it out. But that process, that critical thinking, those are skills that I feel like a lot of kids are missing today. And the ability to place that trust in us and allow us to do those things with Jim's expert guidance, that is what, for me, made Embry-Riddle such an amazing place. I mean, look, we needed some simulation software, and I found this company. It was $150,000.
Yeah.
Can't afford it. So I just called. I called the company, and I got a hold of the president. I said, listen, and I made myself seem bigger than I was. Look, I'm this lab tech. I work at this university, blah, blah, blah. We're working on this project, and we need your software. And the guy says, who is it? I said, it's Embry-Riddle. He says, I heard of Embry-Riddle. And he says, well, look, we don't have $150,000. What can you do for us? And he says, look, I'll tell you what, I will give you the software, but we have to pay for the training. It's $25,000. You got to pay for that because it's people that we send. That's a hard expense. And I said, I just told him, yes, we'll make it happen. I had no idea. I went to Jim and I said, what do I do? He says, you need to set up the meeting with President Sliwa. You need to go talk to the president of the university. And I said, I can't talk to the president of the university. Why do you have this little student? And he says, no. This is your baby. You're going to own it. Go do it. Go over there. Here you go. Go over and talk to the secretary. Tell her I sent you. And I set up a meeting with the president. He sat down with me and I explained the whole thing and what we needed. And he looked me in the eye and he says, do you think this is important to the university and what we're doing? And I said, absolutely, sir. And I explained why. And he says, all right, then we're going to do it. Simple as that. And he signed it off and we got the software donated, and it took our ability to simulate things, which at the time were in Silicon Graphics computers. It took us to the next level. And it was so exciting and empowering. And that experience taught me something about self-confidence. And I carried that to this day of say yes and figure it out. And my entire career has been defined by say yes and then figure it out.
Wow. This is impressive. I mean, it really is. And it really talks about the drive to learn more, the drive to be a student, the passion of what you were doing. Can you talk about today? Tell me about your company today, because you've started it. It's doing very well. You've had numerous companies. You're an entrepreneur all the way across the board. Tell us. My flight advisor.
Well, this is my 7th startup.
Okay.
And I will just tell you this to take you through, and I want to tell a very important story here, if you don't mind, maybe always is, because this is really about the school and what we're doing. And I think it's important for people to realize the power of Embry-Riddle and what it can do for you and how transformative it was. So if you'll indulge me for half a moment, I will carry it up to her. Because, well, I feel like what I'm doing today is far less interesting than what happened to get me here, Embry-Riddle's role in it. When I was working at that laboratory between coming up on my senior year, I was positive that I had a flight slot with Maryland Air National Guard to fly A-10s. And I thought my career was set. I was going to graduate, go to flight school, move to Baltimore, fly for U.S. Airways, and fly A-10s 2 weekends a month, and I'm done. And then I didn't end up getting the slot, and it was devastating to me. And again, I'll go back to Jim Blanchard, who said, Jeff, listen, there's a project that we're going to get that is human factors related for air traffic management for next year. And I want you to be a part of that. And I said, I'm an undergrad. That's a graduate level thing. He said, you've got enough experience here. You could run this project. And I said, you know what? I've been killing myself for 3 years, going to DC, doing internships, working for free. I'm staying here. I'm going to just go to the beach every day and play volleyball and enjoy myself. I was so depressed about not getting that. And I thought my life was off track. Well, unbeknownst to me, Jim went ahead and applied for me. He sent my information in without my permission. And then he called me one day in the office and he said, hey, you got an interview in an hour. And I said, what, with who? He says, with the FAA. And I said, about what? He said, about this internship. You need to go up to DC and learn everything there is to know about air traffic management. And I said, I already told you, I'm not doing that. He said, well, I kind of sent your information and they really like you. So I suggest you hear them out. And Jim is a persuasive gentleman. And again, if he ever sees this, I want to thank him personally for the role that he played in my life. And we actually ran into each other even postgraduate when he left here and was working up in DC on the similar system. But I said, okay, fine. And I did a phone interview and I grudgingly accepted. And I went up there. And not only did I have the time of my life learning everything about air traffic control and going to air traffic control centers and working every day in the headquarters of the FAA, but it went so well that at the end of that summer, the FAA asked my boss to hire me full time. So I actually spent my entire senior year as a full-time employee for the FAA. And I ran this research project here, this human factors research project, which taught me so much. It taught me things that I still use to this day, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. Whether we're pilots, air traffic controllers, CEOs, we're humans, and psychology plays such a role in that. And that experience taught me so much. And that set me on my path, because I left here. I went and worked for the FAA, and my boss at the time became my partner in my first startup, FlightCom. And we built the first flight tracking company in the world. We got the data release from the FAA. Everybody told us, this is only for the airlines. You guys will never get general aviation data released. And we said, all right. I said, happen to know who Phil Boyer is, because I was a long-time AOP. Didn't know him. Drove to Frederick and got a meeting with Phil and said, Phil, listen, the FAA says that members like me can't have this data, and look what we could do with it. And, Phil, just a absolute one-man wrecking crew. He says, really? Okay, well, what do we need to do? I said, we need to sign this Freedom of Information Act request. And then I took it down to Jack Alcott and MEAA, and I knew he would sign next. And then we went to NATA, HAI. We got everybody to sign. It took us about 14 months. We got the data released, and we built a very successful company. And all of that happened because Jim Blanchard sent my information in when I didn't want to do that. And it's so serendipitous, but it was the culture of Embry-Riddle and those things and how it could happen. I ended up coming back to the university when I worked for the FAA. I became the person who was managing the project down here. And it was surreal to go from being a senior to being the guy that was coming here and kind of being a part of that and overseeing it. And it was such an absolute joy and pleasure. And it has guided everything that has happened to this day. It's like I said, my flight advisors, maybe my 6th, 7th startup, charter companies, maintenance companies. I'm actually on my 2nd maintenance company now, in addition to my flight advisor. I've got 3 different companies going, and it's just because it's fun. It's the people that I get to be with, that I get to work with, and, enjoying this career. And that's what, all of that came from this place here.
Thank you for sharing. That is, we see this time and time again where a certain professor or a certain mentor really grabs hold of a student, sees the passion, sees the drive, and goes, I'm going to help you. And that is one of the strengths of here. Sometimes it's a faculty member, sometimes it's a staff member, sometimes it's a coach, but it's someone who sees the value of that individual, not just as a student, but as a person, and says, let me help. And obviously he saw it in you, and you have done incredibly well. With that, as you think about students going forward, what do you look for? What do you think a student should have in their toolkit if you were to hire them today?
That's an excellent question. We're in such a different place. The first thing I look for is just passion. I look for somebody who's doing something not because they want to necessarily get ahead. Of course, they want to get ahead, but because they have a true passion. I look for people who have the desire to serve. As I tell my team now, and the 3 companies I have, the people on my team, they're my customers, and I'm there to serve them. And so, and in turn, by my example, I want them to serve others. And I think when we have a drive, a passion, a desire to serve, and most importantly, we maintain our curiosity and our openness. I can't teach those things. I can't. And if you have those things, then you will go far no matter what you do. If you don't have those things, then it's very, very difficult. And I'm adamant about that. And I'm trying so hard to pay it forward now. And the nonprofit initiatives that I'm involved with, and especially, listen, there's so many kids that can afford to come to this school, that can have this education. There are 10 times as many who are underprivileged who cannot. And we are facing a real workforce problem now. And before it was pilots, now it's maintenance technicians. It's everything. And we all eat from this trough of aviation. And it's incumbent upon all of us to do something about it. And so when I look at what I'm doing on the nonprofit side and the amazing people who are looking to this population, this is a population of people that are overlooked simply because they say, well, they don't have the education or it's a bridge too far. Well, this is exactly where we should be looking. We should be lifting these people up, because not only from an economic standpoint or a community standpoint, but for aviation. There's some incredible kids, and to see the transformation, you might come here with a lot of money and an idea, and you get through aviation and it's great. But for these kids, it literally changes their life and the level of passion they have. And now, say 10 years later, they're successful and they're giving back to the community. Man, what you feel from them, you can't make that up. And our goal now is we built the systems, and now it's scaling this to a level that we can get out there. And we've got a nationwide reach, and we've got a STEM Plus curriculum that gets sold to about 200 schools around the country. Barrington Irving,
Yep.
who I'm sure everybody has heard, who's been my friend for the better part of 17 years, was there since his first flight. One of my close friends was the one who made the airplane happen for his Columbia 400, who believed in him. The people that are just behind him and involved with him, it's amazing. And to the point, I pulled my wife into this, and we're there now helping these kids. The technical training is there, but how do you write a letter? How do you speak to people? How do you communicate? How do you comport yourself? All of these things are so important, those soft skills. And we're there trying to help them with that and show them not only what success looks like, but you could be me. And that is the biggest thing. And not only could you be me, but we're going to show you step by step how you get from where you are to where we are, and how you can then teach that also, because we have to keep paying that forward. So for me, whatever success I've had, and for every success I've had 20 failures, and I've learned far more from those failures than from my successes. But it's this part right now that I'm doing that is the most satisfying, that is the most interesting, and that is the legacy that I want to leave behind, so that if I drop dead tomorrow, I don't care what people remember what I did professionally, but I hope they remember if I touch their life in some small way, if I help them in some small way, if I was part of something that's so much bigger than myself. And that's something that, as Embry-Riddle graduates, we all have to be doing that.
I thank you. And as we close out this episode of Eagle Heritage Project, you have said so much that's so, I'll just say, influential and inspiring without question, and actually selfless as you look forward. Is there anything else you would like to share with our Eagle audience out there at all before we close out today?
Yes, I would say that, the world is moving very quickly. And I think, again, besides that passion, maintaining your curiosity, not waiting for other people to do things for you. Embry-Riddle offered me so many opportunities, but I had to find them and I had to take them. And I think people in this day and age are used to instant gratification, having everything handed to them. Anything great that is achieved is done with sheer force of will sometimes, in realizing that the universe will seem like it's not always on your side, but with your proper application of passion and dedication, you can make it there, but you have to do it yourself. You cannot rely on anybody else to do that. And maintaining flexibility and the ability to learn. AI is out. It's changing everything. But, the one thing that has served me and should serve everybody is the ability to learn. I'm still learning today. And the ability to learn and to grasp things and to take those things and use them and apply them, that skill never goes out of style. So continue learning, stay passionate, stay focused, and you will succeed.
Wow. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today back in your home campus of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University.
So exciting to be here.
It is so great to hear your story, your legacy, your brotherhood connection to what you have done, Lambda Chi Alpha, as we look at it, your connection to the industry, your connection to say, how do we pay this forward? Thank you so much for sharing your time and your inspiration today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
It's our pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you out there, audience, for listening to another podcast of the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University Eagle Heritage Project. I'd like to encourage you to visit our website. Go ahead and email us if you have questions, if you'd like to find other things that we should cover. But most importantly, I hope that you can catch us on the next issue. But Jeff, thank you so much on behalf of Embry-Riddle for who you are and what you've done. And to all of us out there, please join us again. And thank you for being forever an Eagle.